I'm Daniel Comp with 360 Men, and today we have coffee with Dean Rush in Cinco Ranch, Texas. Come on in. I'm having coffee with Dean Rush. He's filling me with memories and experiences and wisdom to apply to decisions in life that I make, and I want you to be part of that conversation. So,
Daniel has just asked me for a narrative really on what I thought possibly would be 3 things that I wish my father had told me when I was younger. As I have said in some other discussion with Daniel, my father died when I was a teenager. And so there was a void in my life there that I would like to have seen, but I did in fact find later on in life. And I would pass them on to you because I found over the years they were very, very fundamentally important. Probably the first thing is something I learned when I was on the way to Vietnam, and my grandfather had taken over as sort of my mentor. Great man, great understanding of life, and he taught me some things that I probably should have known at a younger age. And the first one was when I was on the way to Vietnam, Vicki and my wife and I went by, because I just wanted to see him. We went by his farm. And he had a porch swing, and that porch swing had served me in learning a lot of things about life as we would sit out there with him, and he and I would talk. And so I was sitting in this porch swing, and as I said, en route to Vietnam, no one in my family had been in the military. I was a pilot, and I was going to be working with some special operations people, so it was kind of a different motive. And I remember Grandpa Rush saying, "Dean, I have a question for you." And I said, "What was the question?" And he said, "Are you afraid?" And it was a very basic question, and it's a question that I've asked myself over my life. In fact, I had asked myself that, I guess, when my father had died. And I said, I had to be honest with him, and I said, "Yes, I guess I am." And he said, "Just a moment." He got up from the swing and he walked in the house, and as he came back, he had his Bible open, and he said, "I want you to memorize this verse." And the verse was very simple. It's in Deuteronomy 31:6. The verse actually is interesting because if you'll remember in the Bible, Moses had fought his way back. He had brought the entire nation of Israel back to Israel. And they're about to cross the Jordan, and God stops him and says, "Moses, you have to turn over the command of this great army. You've done a lot of work, but you have to turn it over to your number 2, Joshua." And so Moses turns to Joshua, he's obeying God, and he says, "Joshua, you're now in command." And Joshua argues and said, "No, Moses, I've been following you all these years, and we've been in the wilderness for 40 years, and you've brought us back to the promised land. It's your duty, it's your honor to lead us across the Jordan." And Moses said, "No, Joshua," he said, "this is what God said to do." He said, "I'm too old, and it's time to turn it over to you." And again, Joshua argues. And then in Deuteronomy 31:6 and those other verses and chapters in the Bible, he says the same thing. He says, "Joshua, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will not leave you or abandon you, even in the face of your enemy." You know, when I went to Vietnam, I could not get that verse out of my mind. If I've gone through life, I've undergone some pretty serious cancer incidents in my life. I've gone through a heart problem in my life. I've gone through monetary problems, and those relationships, those times, those hardships, I've always reverted back to thinking about that verse. And I would challenge you now to remember Deuteronomy 31:6, because it works. to understand that God is always there for you. So that's one big lesson that I've learned. Probably the second lesson I've learned, again, is from the Bible. And when I was in the corporate world, I was promoted to be responsible for the whole central section of the United States, from Toronto, Canada, outside of the United States, down to Mexico City. And as I was responsible for those employees, I was sent to Dallas to work in an office there. And I remember people coming into the office and saying, Dean, you're going to sit in this chair, and you have to be responsible to understand what these people need, understand the employees that you have. And so in Dallas, and I worked for AMR Corporation, which is the parent company of American Airlines, and I was responsible for a small section of that company, and they have a general aviation division. So I arrived in Dallas there at the corner of this large office complex with all kinds of cubicle and 500 employees on this one floor. My assistant was sitting outside, and there were 7 chairs in front of her desk. And those 7 chairs were always filled when I arrived with people wanting to come in and ask me questions. And so every day these 7 chairs would be filled, and someone would come in the office and say, Mr. Rush, I need to know how to paint the hangar floors in Ames, Iowa. I'd never been to Ames, Iowa. They wanted to know what kind of uniforms to have the receptionists wear in Midway Airport in Chicago, or possibly what kind of fuel trucks to purchase for Toronto or somewhere else. And I kept, every day this would happen. And I hadn't been to most of these places. Quite honestly, I wanted to say, I don't care. I want you to produce what you're being paid to produce for the company. And then my assistant got up, and she had a Bible, and it was well used. And she came in and showed me some verses from Luke 9 in the Bible and Luke 10. And Luke 9 is where Jesus calls his disciples in. He tells these 12 guys, probably they had some forewarning, but he sent them out with just these simple instructions. He said, I want you to go out with just the clothes on your back. He didn't talk about taking a big training folder or anything. He just said, go out with the clothes on your back, the sandals on your feet, and go into the country. And when you go into a village, you teach and heal. Now, teaching and healing are big deals. They're big deals today. But they were especially big deals then, because he was telling them to teach about God, teach about what God could do for them, and teach about adhering to the rules and the 10 Commandments that God had laid down for man. And so these 12 guys go out, and they spend 2 years in the field, 2 by 2, teaching and healing, and teaching other people to teach and heal. They came back, and then if you go to chapter 10 of Luke, you'll see where they returned, and Jesus takes them on a retreat to Capernaum. Now, on the way to the retreat, 5,000 people approach and say, hey, Jesus, we want you to teach us. And these guys, even with all this faith, say, how do we feed them? We don't have enough food. We don't have time. Jesus said, first of all, take the time, go get some fishes and loaves. And, of course, he expands that so that they are all fed, and they're listening, and they're learning how to teach and heal. He expands the time in Capernaum. Now he's down to his 12 again. And they're just infatuated with all that's happened. And they say to Jesus, we've gone out and we've taught, and you've shown us how to heal. What do we do now, Master? And he says very simply, go and do likewise. He tells them to pick 6 more people. So now they're 72. And they sent, and as he says, go and do likewise. They go out and teach and heal. And here we are 2,000 years later. From those 72, they've expanded, and now the whole world needs to know about Jesus. and the saving grace that He provides. He can get rid of our sins through all of that. So that's probably the second lesson that I wish I'd learned earlier. I've learned it and been able to tell people about it, but it's really the lesson of empowerment. And all of the time that I was worried about not knowing where to go, when I was sitting in that little office and my assistant brought me that lesson, I began to understand that I could not do all of the work. I couldn't, because I didn't understand what they needed at Midway Airport in Chicago or the fixed base operation in Indianapolis. Because they all have questions. I need to empower them. And when I empowered them, I tried to reward them. We did a lot of things, and I probably made a lot of mistakes, but I found out quickly by empowering, I was empowering myself too. I was helping people teach and heal, and once they did that, they didn't want to stop doing it. And as they empowered other people, our company grew, it was profitable, and we were training one another by empowering. There's a great book written by Neil Harris. It's a very small book, and it's called Inside the Magic Kingdom. And that book is really another lesson that I could have learned earlier in life, but it's on how to treat customers, which essentially are other people. And that's the third lesson that I would have. Because I found over the years, if you treat customers well and listen to them, again, this is a form of team dynamics, but if you listen to them, that's really the third lesson. Just simply listening. I remember when I started with AMR Combs, this division of American Airlines that I worked for. At that time, I started at the very lowest level. And it was after cancer. They called, said, do you want to work there? I told them I had cancer and so forth. They said, fine, come on. So they empowered me to come and manage this small fixed base operation in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we had one customer, a guy named Pete Dykehouse, who is going to heaven now. But Pete was the toughest dude you can imagine. Every time he would come back he had a charter airplane. And so his customers would come, he would fly them around the country. He'd come back and he'd want his airplane washed and meticulously gone over by our maintenance staff. He would want the carpets in a certain way inside the airplane. And Pete was a thorn in our side. Every day he would come to my office and threaten to leave. And he has a lot of business. He bought a lot of fuel. He gave us a lot of money to look at his airplane, to maintain his airplane. And it wasn't a large base, so I finally decided one day, because it just was a gut reaction. And again, I can remember what Jesus did. He said, approach people, meet them face to face, and listen. And so I was in the back of my mind beginning to understand we needed to listen to Pete Dykehouse. And so I called all of my employees together who really didn't like Pete Dykehouse. And as I said, he was not only a thorn in our side, he was a thorn all the way around our bodies. But I asked Pete to come to a luncheon, and I called the employees together for the luncheon, and stood in front of them, and they were a little bit skeptical as to why they were there with Pete Dykehouse. And I asked Pete a very simple question, and I said, Pete, you threatened to leave here and we want your business. What do you think it would take to have you remain as a customer of our organization? He looked around the room and he didn't pick out any person individually. He said, honestly, what I want you to do, if you would just simply listen. He said, I sometimes become very arrogant and yelling and belligerent because I want you to listen. He said, I love the facility here. When you do the work, you clean my airplane well. He said, if I were going to leave, I would have already left. But please, just listen. And if you'll do that, I guarantee you I will stay and I will get other people to come and do the same thing. You know, within 3 months, we had all the hangars full, and my people were listening, and I was listening. And it was a great lesson to be learned. Those are my 3 lessons. They're very basic. But I wish I had learned them earlier, and as I learned them in life, I found that they not only helped me as a manager of people, but they helped me as a member of a team, an organization. And that's what a company is. And then lastly, they helped me in my Christian walk, because I could let other people know about them. And it's been a very interesting time. Love the life. I'm now retired from the corporate world. I hope you're not, and you can use some of those pieces of advice.
For me, this is huge value because, as I've shared before, I don't have a chevron in front of me. I have no men in my family to teach me. So if you don't have a father, or if you're feeling that need inside, come sign up, talk with Dean, ask questions, and get guidance from men that have been to war, to corporate top, things that'll give you insight. And I really encourage you to click on that button, subscribe, and come have a conversation.